I think the argument is that like it was always we just didn't see it. Like imagine you've got like a picture of a house on a block, and there's one
Hmm.
house that's beautiful and nine houses that are totally and you take a picture of this house, every week to see how that particular block is doing, and maybe people come by to clean up the house a little bit to keep it nice. And then imagine one day somebody's like, okay, hey, instead of taking a picture of just this one house, we should take a picture of the entire block. And then you do that. Everybody in the house that was nice is gonna be like, dude, what the this place looks horrible now. But the other nine people are like, dude, it always looked this way. You just didn't realize it. So when we talk about, giving the right to vote to a bunch of people that couldn't read and now it's all fucked up because they've got, the right to vote. Well, it was always fucked up for them. They couldn't even read. Like maybe the fact that it was just one group of people that was in charge of the country for so long, that was a problem, but we just never knew about it because they were the only ones who had voices that mattered.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Radio Free America. We have a very, very interesting night ahead of us. I've got Destiny, prominent Twitch streamer, prominent debater, destroyer of Eric Stryker. And I have a couple of things that I wanted. Like, I watched your debate with Eric Stryker. I wasn't familiar with your content
Mm-hmm.
before that debate. But at the same time, people have been saying, you've got to debate Destiny. You've got to debate Destiny. And I didn't know why this was like a thing because I guess in the blood sports days, we're both known as yelling a lot and causing havoc. So,
Mm-hmm.
but there was a couple of things that you had said that I was curious about. One, you said having Ryan Falk on was the most like the dumbest thing you ever did, or something like that.
Possibly it was around that time that I'm starting to be like a little bit more careful in terms of like the type of people I platform to make sure that I'm adequately prepared for the conversation so that I don't
Mm-hmm.
just unintentionally platform somebody that's like speaking a whole bunch of stuff that I'm not ready to adequately respond to.
Oh, okay. I know Ryan pretty well. I mean, I don't. I agree with some of the stuff he says. I disagree with some of the stuff he says. I think sometimes he makes some really interesting content. Sometimes I think he goes a bit overboard.
Mm-hmm.
But I was curious because I heard you've been debating people on the left lately, and you define yourself as like a staunch capitalist.
Yeah, for sure.
So what's your beef with the left right now?
I'm not a communist. So people that are into like communism or socialism or the super anti-capitalist stuff are kind of cringy to me.
Okay, but I mean, in light of everything that's been going on with China,
Uh-huh.
because I mean, I've been on this kick lately that I think the why can't they're saying they can't hear you? Great, hold on, find out if maybe this will work. Try talking again.
Testing 1 2 1 2 3. Testing 1 2.
Um, Try one more time.
Testing 1 2 3 1 2 3 4. Testing 1 2 1 2.
Hold on one more second, and I will figure this out. I don't know why it would have an issue.
Yeah, no problem.
Hold on one more second. Everyone's going to give me boomer tech shit now.
What are you using to broadcast?
I use slobs, but it's never had a problem with all of that, and now I can't understand why all of a sudden it is.
Um, Streamlabs, OBS. Can they hear anything else playing on your computer?
Yeah, they hear me just fine. They're just not hearing you.
Or I mean, can they hear any sounds playing on your computer?
Yeah.
Like if you play a song, can they hear the song?
Mm-hmm.
You're positive of that?
Pretty sure. Yeah.
Hold on.
I use slobs.
Because my only suggestion would be to check the output on your slubs to make sure that it's like outputting like a speaker or something.
Okay, now I got it. Now I got it.
Now it
It's all good now.
Okay.
Yep. Finally. Perfect. Now I could just turn this down a little bit so you're not yelling. But okay, so yeah, as we were talking about in terms of capitalism, I've been on this kick lately because I always just was against the free shit people, like the kind of socialism, for all type attitude. But in light of everything that's been coming out about China and the fact that we always knew they were using slave labor, we always knew that they were, messing with their currency, that they're not using the best equipment, they're not adhering to American standards, you name it, and at the same time we're doing business with them. That's a free traders policy is that we should do business with whoever, wants to do business with us.
Mhm.
But I'm noticing that the cheap shit people, like the people that are like, well, we get everything cheaper by doing business with places like China,
Yeah.
tend to be more zealous and more willing to overlook the negative aspects of just unfettered capitalism on the United States. And the more I talk to people, I have yet to hear someone who can give me a real good argument for why we should keep doing even just the same level of business with China that we have been.
I mean, because we get cheap shit. What do you mean? What more of an argument do you need?
I mean, but how do we justify the fact that exporting American manufacturing has led to the absolute rot of middle class of middle America?
Why should I have to pay? Why should every single working class American have to pay 20% more for an automobile so that we can protect a very small sector of jobs? Why should every single American have to suffer? And why should small businesses that might be able to sell products that other Americans could otherwise afford, but they can't because they have to spend $30,000 on a car that could be $25,000 just to protect a small subset of jobs in the United States? I don't understand that.
But here's my point, though, is that I can accept that argument. But my point being is that if someone announced that they made a car $10,000 cheaper by using the spleen of black people to make the engine, we would be horrified. And we would say, well, that doesn't justify the cheap cost. In China, they're using slave labor. Like they're actually putting people in concentration camps and have them like stitching basketball together with their teeth and shit.
Sure.
They arrest political prisoners and they put them into forced labor. Like, we're allowing the most atrocious human rights abuses to basically dictate our cheap shit. And you don't see this as being a problem.
No, I think it's highly problematic. I think that if we think that other countries should be held to higher labor standards, that's things that we ought to negotiate in things like NAFTA agreements or in things like TPP agreements or using the WHO to make sure that trade remains relatively competitive between countries by enforcing some type of labor standard amongst other countries. So, for instance, like Vietnam had a lot of labor issues, and a lot of those were on the verge of being pushed in a more positive direction had the TPP been signed with America on board. But because America pulled out, a lot of those labor restrictions were relaxed, and now they tossed most of them because the other people that were part of the TPP didn't really care as much about those particular issues. But yeah, I think that multilateral trade agreements are a really good way to try to enforce stricter labor standards on other countries for two reasons. One, because it keeps our own labor force somewhat competitive, and then two, from a moral level, because we probably don't want to be powering our cell phones with computer chips made by, dying children's, itty bitty malnourished hands. Probably not a good idea.
I mean, I've been doing a lot of research into this. I have an MBA in economics, and obviously economics isn't a perfect science, and no one claims to know everything about economics.
Sure, medicine isn't a perfect science. Yeah.
That's a good point too. But I mean, when you look at the numbers, right, just the raw numbers. Now, I'm discounting shipping and I'm discounting cost of integration, because obviously China already has factories, China already has infrastructure that doesn't exist. But in Mexico, the average laborer in the manufacturing sector costs $2.39 an hour when outsourced.
Okay.
In China, it's $4.15. So one would think that you would want to do business with Mexico. It's an anti-immigration person's wet dream to power the Mexican economy and make it so they don't want to come over the border, and kind of take jobs here and power their own country. I mean, we don't have an immigration problem from Canada, and one would think we want to keep it in the hemisphere for the cheaper transportation costs, for the fact that Mexico is somewhat of a democracy. I mean, we'd have to deal with the cartels in some way, either legitimize them or take action against them. But I would argue at this point that China has become more of a corporatocracy / insider's game, where all these people are doing business with China, even though it doesn't actually produce the cheaper goods that it could elsewhere.
Well, they must be cheaper, right? Otherwise, unless we're going to posit some kind of grand conspiracy, otherwise people would just open companies that do all of their supply chain exporting to Mexico, and then they would outcompete those other firms in the U.S. that are foolishly using China, I guess. Right? Like it must be cheaper to export these supply chains to China. There must be other advantages that aren't necessarily directly tied to the average cost of the hourly labor. Like it might be that different types of manufacturing areas are more closely situated in China, such that if something was produced in Mexico, maybe it would have to be refined in Canada, and that process, even though the laborers are paid less, ends up costing more in transportation costs than everything being close together in China. Like that's a possibility. I don't know if that's true or not, but I mean, there clearly must be some advantage or cost savings if people are willing to pay the shipping, across the Pacific to pay for China to do stuff, right?
So, well, one of the main reasons is China has a pretty much a monopoly on rare earth minerals,
Okay, sure.
and
A
rare
lot
earth
of
minerals are
raw
what make
materials.
our computers.
Hmm.
Like our computer chips don't function without rare earth minerals.
Hmm.
Now that's about to change. They've just discovered a massive reserve off the coast of Japan,
Okay.
and they said within 5 years America will have full access to it. So China will lose that market.
Hmm.
But it's the access to rare earth minerals, and as I said, the infrastructure there is already set up.
Sure.
Like if you want to go to a manufacturing plant, they already have it. You don't
Yeah.
have to build it. Now, one could argue that in Mexico they'd be willing to make those investments, but also, again, you're if you just made the decision to go tomorrow, you'd be
Hmm.
dealing with bad actors again because the cartels are basically in charge of Mexico. So you would absolutely be doing business with the cartels if you just started business tomorrow.
Possibly, yeah. I don't know over what swaths of the economy the cartels, wield as much influence as over others. I'm not entirely sure about that. But I mean, like, assuming that we had access to the resources, I'm pretty confident that American capital could spin up manufacturing plants pretty damn fast to start taking advantage of that. Like, I know that the fracking stuff in the United States started to come up pretty quick as we saw the cost of oil rise, and all of a sudden there was a lot of profitable industry in the United States that sprung up seemingly overnight for the extraction of like fracked oil and stuff. So I feel pretty confident that if all of these rare earth minerals were found off the coast of Japan, and if they allowed us to manufacture things pretty cheaply, that there's just so much capital in the U.S. that like these things would spin up immediately. That would be my assumption, unless there are other things that keep that from happening, which there could be, right, as well.
Do you think, and I pretty much know the answer that you're going to say, but I want to
Mhm.
I want to see if I'm right.
Sure.
Do you think there's a moral argument that can be made for not doing business in China because of the effects of what it does to Americans? Not just because of their horrible people in China, but the effects of what it does to American workers, American families, American industries. Do you think there's any level of protectionism that can be justified?
There are two arguments for protectionism. One is somewhat valid, one not. The only somewhat valid one I've heard is for developing industries or developing countries. That a country that is in the process of developing, every part of their economy is going to be less competitive, so maybe they ought to be protected for a small period of time or after great disasters. So, for instance, Japan's economy post World War II was highly protected, and as a result, they were able to spin up some of the most successful electronics companies in the world, right? People like Sony and whatnot. And then so I'm a little bit okay with that one. The standard arguments given for things like the other one the other one that I've heard is for national security, but I think that you can make arguments for national security and against national security when you talk about trade integration. So for instance, some people say, well, if China makes all of our shit, if we go to war with China, we're fucked because they make all of our shit. But then somebody else would just easily say, well, if China makes all of our shit, they're not going to want to go to war with us. People look at the relative peace post World War II in Europe and say that they point to the fact that these countries are trading with each other on levels that have never happened in human history as a reason why there's a relative peace compared to, immediately after World War II and then prior to World War II and World War I especially. So those are the big ones that I hear. I don't think other than that, most of the arguments for protecting jobs usually fall around weird claims of like, if we, import more, we're going to lose jobs or wages are going to fall. And none of these really seem to pan out in the ways that people say they do when we actually study the issues. So I got it. Wait, hello?
Yeah, no, I'm still here. I thought you. I thought you said
No.
hold
I
on.
was gonna say, yeah. Okay, yeah. Go ahead. You can respond. Go ahead.
So as we're talking about protectionism, I know I have just as many disagreements with the right as you probably do with the left, and
Mm-hmm.
I think these conversations are valid because I find myself in an echo chamber more often than not, where I
Mm-hmm.
don't get to hear competing ideas,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't tend to get into the stupid drama of like, people say, oh, he's for some retarded, policy that I could care less about, so you shouldn't talk to people. Like I think talking to people is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I've been struck lately with the idea that in America we do have a rot in our society in terms of people's willingness to work or people's ability to work. And we're also finding a lot less people qualified to do more high tech type jobs, like more higher industry type jobs. And I don't know what the answer is when we say, okay, well, we're going to export whatever we can. And the national security argument that countries that trade together don't go to war together, they do. They just go to war through other means. It's like the Cold War.
Yeah, but that's fine. I'd rather a proxy war than like Chinese troops are landing in California, right? Like no, I mean now that's really insensitive because the countries that are impacted by said proxy wars, so like Yemen, are absolutely fucked, which is horrible, of course. But from a worldwide stage, like technically the side battles are more preferable to like full on like 1v1 massive country versus massive country, of course, right?
Sort of. I mean, I guess we supported the Mujahideen in Afghanistan
Mm-hmm.
against the Soviets because proxy war is better, and then we got 9/11 out of it. So I mean, they do bring the battles here. Like the
Kind of, but
sides
I
that
mean,
get
like
fucked over.
9/11 is a walk in the park compared to bombing the fuck out of each other between the Soviet Union and the United States, right? I would
Oh,
rather
we'll go
100
hands down.
9/11s in the United States versus we're going to war with Russia. Like, here's how we do the bomb shelters, Like that, like, yeah. I mean, that's a cost of the way that we do business, of course. Not to say that 9/11 is good; it's horrible. But again, even the negative blowback from proxy wars is highly preferential compared to like all-out nuclear war or even just massive bombing campaigns from country to country.
I mean, it also depends. I know we addressed this the other day on the debate with Tree of Logic. Is
Uh-huh.
that we also have to deal with the fact that there is the possibility that China uses things like coronavirus or things like that as a way of war by other means. I don't know if it was an attack or not. I to tell you the truth, I don't really care. It's here, and there's nothing like we have to deal with that reality right now.
Uh-huh.
But there is a real argument to be made that asymmetrical warfare is not something that America or China is ready for, but are willing to engage in.
Yeah, a less controversial example of that would actually be cyber warfare, especially with countries like China, Russia, or Iran. The
Mm-hmm.
United States is highly susceptible to those types of attacks, and these things are happening all the time across the world, for sure.
Mm-hmm. It's just it's getting to the point where I think that the issues with China are going to have to come to the forefront at this point.
Uh-huh.
I think there's enough populist anger against China that people are going to respond to it, and I think there will be an economic incentive. People will start buying like goods manufactured elsewhere. Now, of course, 80% of the goods you can't get elsewhere. Like China's just the ones who make the shit, and that's all there is to it. But I think there is going to be somewhat of a backlash against China, and Trump's talking about suing them. Right now, that's against the law, but they could easily change the law tomorrow to make that possible.
I don't think there
So,
is. I don't think there's. That's the thing. I'm not sure if there's the economic drive for it. Like we had. I don't know. I mean, we're older. So, like, do you remember after 9/11? You remember like all the terror-free oil gas stations that popped up? Like,
yep.
those came about for a little while, but at the end of the day, the average American family doesn't really want to spend 20, 30, 40% greater of its expenses just because they're buying made in American goods. Not to mention the fact that downstream from that, not only does buying made in America goods mean that you're spending a greater proportion of your money on it, it also means you don't have as much money to endorse, say, local businesses. So, like, if I lived in a community and I open up a shop and I just sell instruments, if everybody's buying made in America goods, they might not have enough money left for my small business over because now instead of getting cheap shit from China, they're spending a greater percentage of their money buying cars that are only made in America. And now I have to close up shop because people are just spending their money on essential goods that are now more expensive because we've decided to move away from like a more integrated trade system with other countries. I think these are all downstream things that people don't look at all the time.
I think people don't necessarily look at those things all the time, but I think I think populist anger can really translate, and B, I also think that yes, while Americans would rather not spend the extra $20 on a tank of gas, and all that stuff does kind of fade away to the cheap shit argument.
Mm-hmm.
I also think we're at a point with China where we're going to start seeing more backlash from them towards us as well. I mean, they're not happy with the way that we're treating them in trade. They're not happy with the way that we're kind of blaming them for everything, even if I'm one of those people who think they are responsible. But I mean, we're at a point where laws can change and things can change and interrupt like our supply lines. I mean, it's a real fear.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, I would be curious to know like what are good plans going forward. Like I think that it feels like a lot of the times America just doesn't have enough forward-looking vision to actually know what appropriate ways are to pressure other countries. So we resort to things like, so for instance, like if we wanted to punish China or if we wanted to pressure China on like how they do labor, for instance, or on some manufacturing standards or whatever. Like the best way to do that is through multilateral trade agreements. That's where America can swing its big dick and exert its influence. We do really well in WTO cases. A lot of countries that bring cases to the WTO do well, and we but we completely and totally walked away from the TPP. We've ceded all that influence to China as China continues to look outwards and build roads across all of Europe and educate people and send them back to Africa. China is doing all of these outward-reaching, outward-looking things, and in the Western world, where we put up all of our tariffs, we screw all of our local manufacturers over because now everything costs more money. The United Kingdom leaves the European Union because everybody just wants to look inwards. China is the one that's reaching outwards. It's grabbing up all that influence. People don't realize that is the United States, like whether or not we like it or not, or whether or not anybody else likes it or not, the U.S. is the leader of the free world. And every time we take a step back from being involved in these large multinational trade agreements, somebody else is filling that vacuum. And right now, China's the best one poised to do it.
Well, that's true. I mean, you bring up another point too, is that we are the leader of the free world. And our tech companies are developing technologies for China to enforce, like their social credit score and their surveillance state and things like that. And those technologies easily make their way back here. And I don't mean like the 5G conspiracy card shit. I mean more the idea that, they monitor what we say, they monitor what we do, and they use that to enforce a de facto social credit score. Like, I mean, you've been banned from social media channels, so have I. Like, I mean, these are technologies and policies that come about because China demands them, and then they translate back to us. And a lot of times they translate back to us because the Google wants to continue doing business in China. And so does Twitter, and so does everybody else. So they institute standards that they then put back on American citizens.
Yeah, I mean that it's rough. It is, and I mean you've seen it. We've seen it happen in the gaming community. I wish I could remember specifically what this was about, but it had to do with China. Was it Overwatch? Someone in my chat will remember. Or what was the big Blizzard controversy that happened? I think somebody said like free Hong Kong. It was like an Overwatch player or somebody, or was it Hearthstone that said like free Hong Kong? And China, like the Blizzard division of China, like banned, like took away this person's winnings. I think like retroactively or something really crazy. And it was, and we've seen the NBA and China have like a very weird relationship. So yeah, like these are definitely bad things. But the reality is that the U.S. on its own just can't exert as much leverage over China as we could if we were part of a larger trading bloc. Like that's like the shit. You want to be able to go around with 15 other countries and be like, hey, China, like you need to do this or we're not going to trade with you. Because if it's just China and the U.S., if it's just a unilateral, like a one-on-one thing, well, China is a really big boy and it can swing its influence around in a lot of ways that the United States maybe isn't necessarily prepared to do, right? Since China operates under like an authoritarian state, they are much more effective and ruthless with how they proceed with their business stuff. Whereas in the United States, we always have to cuck ourselves to like political processes, that might be unpopular in 4 years. China can say something like, we're doing green energy for the next 15 years. I don't give a fuck if you like it or not. Boom. The United States can't even hold on to like an Iranian agreement made with other countries because our next political leader that comes in might not like it. We have a much harder time pushing forward in positive directions because of our democratic system versus China's authoritarian one.
One of my super chatters says, Destiny, do you believe that supply and demand is a valid economic theory? If so, do you believe this applies to labor as well as goods?
Yeah, well, yeah, all of those are undeniable. Supply and demand is obviously a thing. It's like descriptively a reality of the world. And then resources are supplies. Labor is a resource, so labor is a supply, of course. Yeah.
But I mean, can we? I mean, for me personally, in terms of American power, we don't have the ability to make the kind of alliances that we used to.
Why not?
I mean. No, because most people won't go with us.
But they do. The rest of the world absolutely follows us. We take point on issues like in the Middle East. Like that was the U.S. that drove us into Iraq. That wasn't the EU. That wasn't the UN. That was a United States-led invasion. It was the U.S. that got us into Afghanistan. It's the U.S. that largely maintains alliances with people like Saudi Arabia and the UAE and supports things like civil wars going on in Yemen or things going on in Syria. So the rest of the world very much looks to the U.S. for guidance on things like the Iranian deal, on how to deal with North Korea. Japan and South Korea look to the U.S. on that. I would say as of recently, because of Trump's rhetoric, the rest of the world is a little bit more like WTF. NATO isn't quite as sure if the U.S. is going to take point anymore. Angela Merkel in Germany has said, like, I don't know if we can trust the U.S. anymore. We fight with leaders to the south and the north of us. We fight with Australia. So, I mean, as of recently, I would agree. But I think that, like, prior to Trump especially, and even still with Trump, the rest of the world kind of looks to America for, like, hey, how are we going to do shit? How are we going to handle shit? I think that, like, yeah, I don't know. I feel like that's still very true even today. And I think America can, if we have a decisive point on something, then like, I think that America can still, take charge on issues and be a leader in certain areas. We just are so lost lately that it's hard to do it. I
mean, do you think American ingenuity can survive woke culture? I mean,
I don't think woke culture has.
and that's a serious question. I'm not saying that as like a gotcha moment.
So there's two parts to this. So on one end, like on like the frustrating thing that it is to deal with this is that like conservatives and liberals will bicker back and forth over who's woke or what is woke and should we, whatever, black people. Meanwhile, China is opening up all of these amazing two-way educational programs with people in Africa. China's not doing it to be fucking woke. China's not doing it because they like, black people or blah, blah, blah. China's doing it because there's an incredibly real economic advantage and geopolitical advantage to being allied with countries that are in other parts of the world. So, we can argue with like, should affirmative action be real, blah, 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 blah. But at the end of the day, it's in our best interest to integrate as many different groups of people as possible. Because having happy black people, having happy Hispanic people, Asian Americans or whatever, increases our relationships with other countries around the world as well. So I mean, like, I would say that like wokeness isn't like just like a battle that we should have to be more morally righteous. Wokeness is like a necessity for a more integrated, globalized world. I think it incredibly benefits us to be able to integrate people of other cultures, whether they look different or act different or speak different languages, under American culture so that we can work with them in the future. It makes our country stronger as a result.
I mean, the real issue is that whether you look at it in terms of micro or macro, because every empire gets its quagmire. Every empire loses its empire in the dirt of a foreign land. Rome did in Europe, Britain did in India, we did in the Middle East, basically. And now, China is going to get in the same quagmire in Africa, because, I mean, you can only do so much to run a foreign land. You know what I'm saying? And that's what winds up happening. When you have tied up economic interests in the developing world, sooner or later, those conflicts turn military. And that's how empires fall.
It's possible. I can't. So one of the dangers is like nothing has ever happened a certain way until it does. Like it's possible that maybe we're at a phase on the planet where these are the last great empires. Maybe America in some form. Like I think America already has the longest history of any founding document still in use today as a government around the world. I don't think anybody has a founding document that's as old as the U.S. Constitution. Now it's kind of cheating because we can change ours, but like, so it's possible that maybe today we're already seeing the last huge empires. That might be a little bit naive. Maybe in 100 years, maybe it does change completely, but I don't think that we should be looking, to say like, well, our downfall was in 2012 and now we're just, sailing to the bottom. Like, I think we should still function as though we're on top and continue to try to like make pushes towards it, right?
Well, I don't think you could ever point to a single like year or event that leads to the downfall. I think it's always foreign adventurism that ends empires. I mean, empires can only be maintained for so long before you just basically run out of money.
I mean, I'm sure there are empires that have been ended because of like invasions, like locally, because another country has taken them over, or because of a revolution from within a country, right? Like the American Revolution almost ended the United States, or not the American Revolution, I shouldn't say, the Civil War. Like arguably could have been like disastrous for the United States. I mean, like I'm sure there are a lot of reasons. Like I don't think that just. Like, are you trying to make an argument that we shouldn't have any type of foreign interest whatsoever, and that would insulate us from the reasons why? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I guess
there's no valid historical or modern argument that you can isolate from the rest of the world and have it work out well for you. In fact, it always works out worse. So I don't believe in pure isolationism. I don't think anybody realistically does. I think there are probably like some spurgtards who kind of go that direction because they think it sounds nice in theory. But you can't just, especially now with the internet, you can't just not engage with the rest of the world at all. But at the same time, there are arguments to be made for pursuing national interest, and that national interest, of course, starts at home.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a reasonable argument to take, that you ought to prioritize your own citizens over other people. I just think that people get a little bit lost and assume that prioritizing your own citizens means no immigration, no trade with certain countries. Like, if anything, that damages your own native population more than helps them, I think.
So, I mean, at this point, I'm a zero immigration guy, but I'm not a zero immigration guy because I think that like immigrants are dirty or anything like that. It comes just down to more that we're so messed up internally right now that I just think that adding more variables to the equation just doesn't help.
How, like, in what ways are we like messed up? I'm curious. Like when you say that, like what are you looking to? Like when you're like, oh, like these are some, like if you had to give like maybe 2 or 3 ways you feel like America's like really messed up right now.
is that if you look at the downward trend in innovation, if you look at the downward trend in education, if you look at the amount of single mothers out there that are on skyrocketing and the declining birth rate, like these are all things that spell national doom. I mean, eventually, if education doesn't improve,
Hmm.
and they're improving everywhere else, Common Core has been an unmitigated disaster. All the numbers bear it out that people are learning worse because of Common Core,
Wait, so
but we're not addressing it.
okay, so this is something that's always confused me. So if
Mhm.
education is such a big deal to conservatives, why are we so against funding it? Like, why is it so hard to get conservatives on board with stuff like, okay, well, maybe college should be free? I'm not even for free college, but like, why not say like college, or at least 2 years of college, like Biden is suggesting, should be free, or we should dramatically subsidize poorer kids being able to go to school? Why is it conservatives traditionally? And I'm kind of asking you to account for the conservative platform. Maybe you are different on this, but like, I mean, how do you feel about things like free education or dramatically increasing funding to public schools through the increase of property tax or something? Like, are you on board with stuff like that?
So I'm probably the worst person to ask this to. Number one, I don't consider myself a conservative. I'm very right wing, but like I'm not on board with like mainstream conservatism at all.
Okay.
Number two, all my kids go to private school.
Okay.
So, and that's because I send them to religious school. I'm an Orthodox Jew. So like for me, if you look at me at a micro level, right?
Mm-hmm.
I believe that funding educate, I'd eat out of a dumpster before I would let my kids go to public school.
Okay, but like,
But
what? But if we're talking about increasing education in the United States, then don't we need to be ready to make those like financial investments in our educational institutions?
but we have made those investments and it hasn't panned out very well. The problem is we're spending a lot of money, but we're not spending it well. Like the majority of time that we increase education funding, it goes to increase administrator salaries and it goes to increase teacher salaries, which
Well,
I don't necessarily have a problem with if it's coupled with increasing resources to students, which it usually is not.
aren't American teachers like some of the lowest paid teachers around the world? If we compare it to like really if we compare it to like really high achieving places like Finland or I think like Denmark or Sweden or Norway, like these countries, aren't their teachers typically paid way more than American teachers? Like,
I mean, number one, their taxes are also way higher. So they have, one would argue they have more access to resources to invest in those departments. But also, you're dealing with an incredibly homogenous population with a very restrictive educational environment. Like I lived in Israel for a while, right? And they have most of the socialized programs that you're talking about. Like when you apply to college, if you don't qualify for a degree in history, like you have to take a certain test. If you don't qualify, you just don't get in. There's no even option to pay for it privately. So there's no choice. You have to test into whatever you want to do. If once you test in, they pay for it.
so what? So what is
But
like? So what's like? What are some solutions to the United States education problem right now then that have anything to do with I guess like immigration or
I,
what?
I tend to I tend to believe in localization of everything. So I think that I would be all for higher education spending if it was localized.
But if we
I
look
think
at like
federal
every
spending.
other successful country that does education, so the two leading ones that I'm aware of, I think, are South Korea and Finland. Their education is
Mhm.
like, if you hate Common Core, these guys are like Common Core on steroids. Like they're like
Yep.
ultra like uniform in terms of the standards that they expect between their schools and whatnot. Why would we think that going in the exact opposite direction would be a successful measure to utilize it?
Well, there've been a lot of studies, and I can link you at some point. I'd have to look them up, find the exact studies. Both of them have an extremely, almost inordinate focus on civics. Is that the in South Korea every day when they get to school, they clean the school. They deal with manners. They deal with organization. It's a lot more than just education in South Korea. It's almost considered like national priority. It's to an extent it's almost like military service. It's just not as strict, obviously. Like they don't like cane you if you misbehave in class or something like that. But
Is that
and
the?
even in Europe,
But is that
even
like
in
the
Europe,
main
this is
difference?
very. I would probably say that it's a very decent amount of difference. Also, we have South Korea and most of Europe don't have the disparate types of populations that we do. When you look at inner city schools in America, you're dealing with groups of people that are exceptionally poor. And I'm not talking about racial differences. I'm talking about poverty differences. So the amount of resources that need to go into those schools are astronomically higher than what needs to go into, like, let's say, a suburban school, or even to some level of rural school. But because we have those differences and we don't have an outlet in federal law that allows us to fund things at different levels like that. Like we can't say like this place is poor, therefore we're going to give them more money at the expense of this richer school, or we'll increase property taxes here for this one school federally, but like we'll institute a federal property tax or a federal sales tax or anything like that. Like equal is a thing in America, and they would immediately be hit with a lawsuit if they tried not to. I'm not saying that civics is everything, but I'm saying it is part of it. And we keep a lot of those things out of American schools. We don't teach people morals. We don't, and I'm not even saying that that's a good or a bad thing. I don't particularly want teachers teaching my kids morals, that I don't know about beforehand. But at the same time, I don't think our educational systems could be compared because they're so dramatically different.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like this idea, this kind of like this weird American exceptionalist idea is given a lot in reputation for like forms of socialized healthcare as well. I don't know. I just don't buy it. I feel like if we wanted to design like a better education system, the easiest way, honestly, the easiest way to do anything, regardless of what your job is to find like who does it the best and then just copy it. Like people tell you that all the time, America's education system is definitely lacking in some cases behind other countries. It seems like the easiest thing to do is you just, well, how do they do it? How do they fund it? How is their education different? Let's just copy it. And then maybe we can improve on that if we want to, if we really believe that we're exceptional. The idea of like having like a highly fragmented educational system with no federal standards or guidelines, though, doesn't seem like the way forward for American education, I guess. It just seems like I don't think this just doesn't sound like it would be in step with what the rest of the world has discovered about education.
But there can be federal standards, but those federal standards can be very, very broad. They can be that X amount of percent have to pass a certain level of literacy, have to pass a certain level of math, have to attend a certain amount of physical education. Like, I mean, we
that's
can
all
put
you're describing. Common Core, right? That's all that is. Common Core is just like a broad set of federal standards. Like a student should be able to do this or that by 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, right?
No, Common Core is more the idea that the states accept an educational curriculum that teaches in a certain way.
No, not at all. And Common Core makes absolutely no curriculum recommendations. Common Core has nothing to do with curriculum. Common Core is literally just like, these are what students ought to be able to do. I've seen like a lot of people post videos where they're like, Common Core teaches us to do math like this, but I don't think Common Core makes curriculum recommendations whatsoever. It's explicitly not a curriculum.
I'm not sure if that's true, but I mean, I'll concede that it could be because I don't know well enough. But I don't know if that's true because I know if you look at the math, like even I look at the math that my kids are doing, and I have a degree in advanced mathematics. Like, I mean, I know math, and I look at it, and I have trouble figuring out what they're trying to get them to do.
Wait, is that okay? I'm not going to push you too hard or whatever. But like when you say you have a degree in advanced mathematics, what exactly do you mean by that?
I got my first undergrad in theoretical mathematics.
Okay. So,
which is applied physics, which is what I study.
Okay, gotcha. So I don't know what you've seen versus what I've seen. I did a lot of math in high school, like multiple levels of calculus. When I look at Common Core math, the thing that surprises me the most is most of like what people call Common Core math problems. Usually those are things that I did in my head anyway. Which is my biggest complaint, by the way. Well, but I mean like the old ways that we learned how to do math and long division were horrible. like here's 4 numbers and then multiply that one and that one and that one and that one. Like even though it looks weird, things like the weird like the train tracks. Like if you're doing 124 times 72, you train track 72 to 50 and then you do that or whatever. Even though it looks weird, like I think logically, it feels like when I see the weird math things, it's more that they're actually finally teaching the theory behind the numbers rather than just like making you memorize multiplication shortcuts. That's what it feels like. I don't know. I feel like newer ways that I've seen teaching math are way better than the very weird ways that they used to teach us back in school that I would almost have to unlearn as I grew in math classes because I realized how inefficient a lot of it was.
Well, so I've been trying to do the same. And what's funny is that when we learned our multiplication tables, we just learned to memorize them.
Yeah. Through 12, at least we did, yeah.
That way you could look at a number and just know what the multiplication is. They don't teach that anymore. That's actually frowned upon. They actually take out like tools like number bars and say like 8, 9 and it's like abacus style. And when I look at that and I mean my kids have difficulty with it and they're all very good at math, so it's one of those things. And it's the idea of a Common Core is the idea that people can't try things that are different. They can't try things that are new. You
Well, I
know,
don't think it's bad. I mean, like assuming that like so Common Core is just like I think it's like I think it's okay to broadly say your students should know how to like read at a decent level by the time they're in 8th grade, or they should know how to do like long division by 5th grade or something. I think it's okay to have like federal standards. If you're going to try like a new curriculum or whatever, you can do that. But again, like my understanding is that like Common Core is explicitly not curriculum. Common Core makes no claims on curriculum. It just says this is just what your students need to be able to do by the time they graduate, you know, a certain grade or whatever.
hmm So I mean, but I'll get back to the
Mm-hmm.
to the original point.
Sure.
Is that we are failing our kids in terms of education, and like you said, there are ways that we could probably change that,
Mm-hmm.
but we're not at the moment. And what in the ways that we're declining in the West, especially in America, are ways that other countries are being innovative with. They're actually advancing past us. Like, I mean, India is graduating more computer programmers, and it's per capita. I'm not even talking about like just raw numbers, you know, because they're teaching it at a very young age.
Mm-hmm.
They're teaching people to use computers that we're not doing. Like kids are now just finally starting to get laptops in high school, but they're not learning how to use anything except for Google Classroom, which just is basically a textbook on a computer. You know, like there's no
I,
there,
do you think it maybe is it possible that it's because a certain type of private school might teach a thing a certain way?
my private school teaches things completely different. I don't use them as the example. My family are all public school teachers,
Okay,
so
gotcha.
I look at what they're doing as compared, because my kids' private school, they had laptops in first grade.
Okay, gotcha.
So
I'm
I mean,
just because I'm looking some of this up because I'm curious. So like by grade 3, fluently multiply and divide within 100 using strategies such as the relationship between multiplication and division or properties of operations. By the end of grade 3, know from memory all products of two one-digit numbers. Like it seems like for Common Core standards, like in terms of having your multiplication tables memorized, like that would be one of them. I don't know. It feels like I don't know. It feels like the like having like sets of federal guidelines to do like just for stuff that students ought to know, I think is probably an okay thing. I think like I wouldn't want like if people want to try their own educational guidelines, that's fine on a local level, but I think there should be some federal standards. Like I would feel like shit if there was some small town that sent their kids to some school and the school did, you know, whatever small town schooling, and then every kid came out not knowing how to add or subtract or not knowing how to read
yeah.
because the school wanted to do some different, right?
See, I would agree with that 100%. But
Mm-hmm.
my issue is this: is that federal money tends to be federal control,
Yeah.
and we've proven that the states react very differently to different types of standards. But you also look at the idea of like of colleges, right? We're just going to give them money, but we're not going to demand certain standards even from colleges. Like, I mean, in terms of what they teach, in terms of theory, in terms of research. Like, if we're just giving them money for students, which we are kind of doing right now, except for the students have to pay it back themselves.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, we're not in any way, I don't want to say supervising, but we're not getting involved in collegiate standards. And a
Isn't
lot
that,
of
don't
people
we
are
have
going to
like,
college.
aren't schools literally like accredited schools for issuing certain degrees? Isn't that like part of a federal process? Like, I can't just open a school. I have to actually get like federal accreditation.
Accreditation.
Yeah, in order to be able to take like public
Give
funding
unban,
money in the
please.
form
I
of
am
like
sorry,
Stafford loans or
Dad.
something like that, right? Or for my degree to
Well,
actually
yeah,
mean anything.
but what that does is it basically applies standards in terms of how many credits does a person have to take to graduate, how many 101 level, 201, 301, 401 level does one need for a pursuit of a degree.
Mm-hmm.
Do they have a certain number of core classes that they have to take in order to advanced classes? It doesn't dictate what they teach or what they research. It just dictates that they follow a certain
Wait, so I'm curious. You really think from an accredited college, I could get like a master's in chemistry and not know what stoichiometry is, or I could get like a master's in some physics and not know like basic, you know, like what, you know, what is like the rate of something falling in a vacuum? That I could just not learn some things as long as it follows the structure. Like I'll just get the degree. There's got to be some. I don't know it like 100%, but I would like without even knowing, I would put money that there must be some sort of like curriculum standard for colleges and universities for them to get accreditation in order to give a degree. There has to be.
There is a minimum standard on that, but what I'm talking about is that federally funded colleges are churning out degrees that have no practical value in society itself, and are turning out more jobless to an extent that we have to create diversity quotas in order to accommodate people that don't have actual degrees. Like I have a friend who was federally funded from freshman in college to right up to PhD. She has a PhD in queer studies and can't do anything with it.
That's,
Like, I mean,
if she wants to get a
queer
PhD
studies.
in queer studies, that's awesome. I love liberal arts, and I think more people should study them if they have the financial means to do so. But you can't expect a liberal arts PhD to net you a high-paying job. Like, the fact of the matter
But she
is,
expected us to pay for it, though, and we did.
that's
Because
fine. That's
she-
great. We ought to. We should pay for liberal arts degrees in society. They're some of the most important things. Like every single thing that we enjoy comes from like liberal arts. Like STEM people aren't actors. STEM people aren't musicians. STEM people aren't artists. Right? These are all liberal arts. You know, the study of language and history and you know language not language. I'm sorry. Things like plays and literature. Like these all fall under liberal arts. We should fund that. I gladly federally fund that. The idea that colleges though are churning out people that can't get jobs. That's just not true. Like one of the best arguments, ironically enough, against funding like federal education is the fact that college degrees are way too overpowered in like normal society. Like the wage earnings, the wage premiums that are conferred on you from just a 4-year degree in any like STEM field is massive. It's like $20,000 a year. You go from like $36,000 to like $58,000 average earnings, median earnings, like just like entry level in terms of earnings for your degree, and that doesn't even include your future projected lifetime earnings as you grow in your career. Like the idea, I know it's like a big Reddit thing that a lot of people are like, oh no, we all got degrees and now we're working at Starbucks. I mean, maybe if you got like a liberal arts degree in like LGBT studies, you did, but if you got like any relevant degree in like engineering or even teaching or anything else, like chances are you got a pretty good job because of it, like for sure.
But don't you think, like, look, I don't have a problem necessarily with some liberal arts. I have a problem with them personally.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, if there wasn't federal money available and one of my kids said they wanted to study queer studies and pay, you know, expected me to pay for it, I would just say no, because I don't see a value to it. I don't think they're going to graduate with any ability to make money from that investment that I would make. You know, but at the same time, I don't claim that I'm the moral compass of America. So I don't claim that I could say, okay, your degree is shit and your degree is not shit and all of that. But at the same time, we are pushing people towards college in general
Mm-hmm.
for degrees that have very low value. And at the same time, we're steering them away from professional certifications that have an extremely high value. And I'll give you an example. I'll give you a good example. I have a relative that works at an inner city public school, right? They have one of the best vocational schools in the country. I think it's ranked in the top 15, right? They're not allowed to recommend that to students. It's considered racist.
Wait, to not recommend what?
Vocational school, learning how to be a plumber or welder or something like that. And they have one of the best in the country. The student has to specifically come to the teacher and ask for it before the teacher is allowed to write the recommendation that they go to the vocational area of the high school. And this is, I mean, criminal, because these are my relative teaches special education. Like, these are kids that are not going to college. You know, like they're not gonna go to community college. They're just not able. You know, and they can't go learn. I know plumbers that make more than doctors, and they can't go learn how to be a plumber. They can't learn how to be a welder, which does not require a high-low intellectual capacity, but it just requires physical ability, you know, and knowledge of what you're doing.
Sure. So, I mean, I can't speak to like the personal anecdotes. I mean, in general, like I'm sure that there's a lot of value in doing vocational schools. I don't know if a plumber can expect to make more than a doctor unless they like own their own business and like hire out other plumbers. But then they're not a plumber; they're a business owner. Back to something that you said prior to this, the idea of like I don't want my kid to get a college degree with something that's going to make money. I think it's really important that we fund that's like the most needed type of funding for education is the type that won't make money. You know, there's not a lot of money to be made in writing history books or in accounting for, you know, earlier we were talking about why empires fall. We don't know that because some historian, you know, made thousands of dollars every week, you know, going through the archives in London and Moscow and reading through incredibly boring stuff. We know this because people's educations are largely subsidized in universities and they get paid and they get tenure at the university so that they can like engage in this type of research. I think there's a lot of value in arts degrees that don't necessarily make you money that like a market system doesn't value. I think that's super, super important to provide for that. In terms of like pushing kids away from degrees of high value to low value, man, like I don't want to speak anecdotally because I think in general it's really bad, but like every single person I know, every single school that I know, like people jerk off STEM degrees so hard. Go to school, get a job. You need to get a good degree so you can get a job. You want to get a high degree so you can get a high paying job. You go to school, get a degree, get a job. That's what you go to school. Like I hear that type of rhetoric all the time. When people do like career fairs and stuff at school, it's all the local businesses that go in and they try to draft you. They try to get you as interns so that you can get a job right out of college, like getting degrees. Like people always talk about like, what's the degree I can get that makes me the most money, blah, blah, blah. Like it feels like people are pushing pushed towards like those high earner degrees like super hardcore. Like people are pushed to those degrees so hardcore. I saw like a mini movement, I guess, on Twitter a while ago where people were trying to change STEM to STEAM, where it's STEARM. Or STEAM, sorry, not RM, where the A stands for arts, because they wanted to put arts in there because everybody had lost interest in doing liberal arts, and the only thing people wanted were, STEM degrees. The idea that, like, I don't know, like there's so many signals from the market that like we need nurses, we need doctors, we need computer engineers and scientists, like they pay so much money for it. I don't know if I believe that we're pushing kids away from high value degrees. It seems like if anything, they're more in demand than ever.
Yeah, but I mean, you just brought up a good point. Nursing school. Mm-hmm. Right? Nursing school should not require a college degree. It should require a professional degree. You go to school, you learn how to do the things that a nurse does, and you become a nurse. I mean, that to me is a no-brainer.
Well, like it depends on what you want to be. Like if you want to be like a CNA, like a certified nursing assistant, like you don't do fuck all, right? Like you're you like go to old people's homes and watch them die, basically. But if you want to be like an RN, like a register, like I think to be a CNA, I don't even think you need an undergrad. I could be wrong. I think you can become a CNA without an undergrad. But if you want to be like an RN, like a registered nurse, you're doing a lot more work. Like I'm pretty sure that like registered nurses can like intubate patients and like I think can like do injections and stuff like that, like in a hospital. I mean, I kind of want those people to be educated. I don't want an RN that is like dropped out of high school and got their 2-year accreditation at the local registered nurse vocational academy and is like walking down to the hospital and is now shoving tubes in my throat. I mean, I think that like some level of education is okay depending on like the level of nursing that you're involved in, I think.
Right, but I don't think that requires like liberal arts classes, or it doesn't require, literature classes or English classes. I mean, those are things that you should need to get into a professional program in the first place. But, like you should have a high school education. Like you shouldn't just be able to, drop out and go become a nurse. But at the same time, like the 4-year college experience and the cost incurred by it is not necessary for the things they teach you to become a nurse.
I mean, like, I guess maybe this is just like a philosophical thing. I feel like, so in American colleges, and I think America is relatively unique here compared to Europe. I think in America, we have more gen eds than European countries or like Asian countries.
We really do.
Yeah.
We really do.
The idea is supposed to be that like, if you go to a university in America, as you come out of a 4-year Wait, hello?
I'm still here. Don't worry about it.
Okay, cool. As you come out of like a 4-year program, like you should be like somewhat well-rounded. Like at the very least, you should take like a few courses every year to kind of like gain like a deeper understanding about things that aren't necessarily related to your particular field, because it makes you like a more well-rounded individual. I mean, like when I hear stories of people that are like engineers that literally can't write emails to their, fellow coworkers to save their lives, or where like I've seen drafts of emails that like computer programmers will send where the grammar is literally like an 8th grade level. It's cringe to read. Like these people can't write to save their lives. I don't know. I kind of wonder like maybe a couple of liberal arts classes would help some people that are working in these jobs for like basic communication skills. Like it seems like pretty important, Like it sucks because too, like when you go into programming and shit, like if you're the one guy at your office that can program but also like can talk to other humans, like you're the guy that's fucking fast tracked to like manager and supervisor positions, and then you hate your life because you've got to do a job you don't want because you're the only person that knows how to communicate to other human beings. I don't know. I think the idea of being like a little bit more well-rounded, maybe there is a conversation to be had about taking too many gen eds, but I think the concept of being a bit more well-rounded as an individual, I think is a noble concept that's worth pursuing through education.
I think it's a noble concept. I just don't think it winds up being what you hope it will be. But but before I run out of time, because I only scheduled about an hour, I want to ask you a couple questions about this. Mm-hmm. Why do you debate so many people? Like what do you find do you just enjoy it, or like do you find it valuable? Because I'm the same way, so I'm just curious, because I think you've racked up as many debate hours as I have at this point. So. Mm-hmm.
This sounds like really IQ Lord or whatever, but I really like discovering information. I really like finding out like what the best positions are on things, and I usually find out that the people that are the most motivated to show me that I'm incorrect about something are usually people that want to debate me or have a disagreement with me. So if I believe a particular idea, it's like the old adage, like if you want to figure out if you have problems with like a Windows computer, you don't go on to a forum and say like, hey, can somebody help me debug Windows 10? Like, I can't figure out how to get my desktop working. You never do that. You would go onto the forum and you'd be like, man, Windows 10 sucks. Like, I can do so many better things with my Mac's desktop than I ever could with my Windows PC. And everybody will show up telling you exactly why you're wrong and what you should do, right? And it's the same thing with like debate, I think, you know? If I have a particular opinion and I put it out there in a relatively combative way, it's very quickly people will show up to tell me why I'm wrong about a particular thing. And then I can find out pretty quickly whether or not I'm correct or whether or not I'm full of shit. You know?
So why do you get tagged with so many like awful positions? Like I've heard people say you're into child porn and all this. And by the way, I watched those debates because I don't believe that that's what a person would say and still have followers. So I watched what you said and it isn't what you actually said. But I'm just curious, like, how do you get tagged with such awful shit?
I think generally when people have conversations, this is a whole other 2-hour conversation. The short of it is that I think generally when people have conversations, I think generally when people get into politics, actually, they're not usually coming with like very strong political convictions. They're usually looking for groups of people that they can fit in with because they have some common values, and then they end up inheriting their political positions later. I think that when you start debating people that challenge your positions fundamentally, there are 2 options. You can either accept their arguments and change your position, or you can reevaluate your position and come to a better conclusion. I'm sorry, there are 3 options. Or the third one is you find some way to discredit what the other person is saying to resolve your cognitive dissonance. That's usually the easiest one. So if I challenge somebody's opinion on a particular topic, rather than either doing the research and educating themselves, rather than coming around to my position, usually it's easier to just call me like a midget child molester or rapist or something, and then like to be done with it. And then conservative bootlicker cuck if you're on the left, or, you know, a socialist commie authoritarian cuck who wants to steal money from billionaires if you're on the right, or, you know, a pornography child lover if you're a centrist. I don't know, just everybody's got a different nickname for me.
You see, I don't have that problem because everyone just calls me a Jew.
Oh, okay.
So
yeah,
you know,
too,
right,
yeah.
left, and center. So I don't have to worry about it. Like I know what their argument is against me. So and that tends to be it.
Sure.
But I mean, you were involved in the blood sports days, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. It was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Oh man, do I miss those days?
Yeah.
That was.
It seemed like as soon as I stepped out of some of those communities, they started to turn on themselves and fell apart like pretty hardcore. Like Tonkasaw, Warski. I think Ralph Ethan kind of survived it. He still kind of does his show. But like a lot of people, yeah, like those communities can only last so long before they start to turn in on themselves and then eat themselves alive, I think.
I mean, Ethan's still doing it. He's determined to break. I mean, you were just on with Stryker. I was on debating a black Israelite about who the true Jews were, and that was a dumpster fire. But I mean, he's doing a good job. Tree of Logic is doing a good job taking it in the other direction. She's trying really hard to like push it in a more intellectual direction as opposed to just yelling and you know. But I don't know. I'm a big fan of debate also, just because I want to know that what I'm saying is right, and I think that I want to be challenged. Like I don't mind if someone gets that gotcha moment where they say something I've never heard of before, and then I sit there and go, I don't know what you're talking about. Like I'm fine with that because it gives me homework.
Sure.
You know, and I also don't believe that stifling opinion works. Like, I mean, when I debated Mike Enoch, the first thing he said is, oh, people like you want to shut me up and hide me away so that I can't get my views out there. I said, I wanted you to have a bigger microphone. I want people to hear how absolutely sick you are about how what the things you say are actually going to accomplish. I want that to be heard because I think people will disagree with you.
Sure.
I think hiding you away in a corner gives you a kind of props that you don't deserve. You get unearned valor from that, you know. And he was blown away. He didn't even like know how to respond to something like that. And of course, I get told, "Oh, you platform all these horrible people. You know, you talk to all these horrible people." And I don't really care when people say shit like that. But man, I don't know. I'm really. I have to say, I watched your debate with Stryker. I was really impressed.
Thanks.
Not just because I hate Stryker like a lot, but because they tend to do that. They like people like him. They tend to bring out a statistic, and if you look at the actual source for the statistic they quote, it's a complete made up piece of shit.
Generally, or they're half.
You know, and like he had brought up that one thing. He said 27% of people are for Israel, with the assumption that the rest weren't. And then you were like, well, wait a minute. What you said is just a giant lie, and he didn't know what to say.
Yeah.
You know, someone's asking, am I going to answer super chats? I will get to the super chats at the end. I didn't want to interrupt the conversation by throwing up super chats. But I wanted to see if anyone specifically had anything for you before we.
Sure. I'm curious. What's your quick take on why you believe we shouldn't have the 19th Amendment? Why women shouldn't vote?
It's listen. It's a taking women rights away, repealing the 19th Amendment. I don't believe in universal suffrage.
Okay.
Is what I don't believe in. I don't believe that you should be allowed to vote on the basis that you were born.
Who do you think?
I don't think that people who don't contribute to society should have a say in how the resources of that society are expended. So if you wanted to go on a family basis, if you wanted to go on a net taxpayer basis, if you wanted to do that, I'd be fine with it. I'm just opposed to universal suffrage, and I believe that universal suffrage is a tool of tyranny. But we can get into this for a few minutes. I mean, what would be your argument against that?
I think that on the face it sounds okay. I think the problem that you run into becomes cyclical, that any group that you choose to value for suffrage will become self-perpetuating and will only represent their interests, and very quickly will begin to dominate the politisphere and make it so that other voices will never be able to will ever be able to enter that space. So, for instance, let's say that only people that made over 150,000 a year were allowed to vote. If that was true, the composition of government would change, and our government policy would probably change to value those people far more than everybody else. And then we would probably start to see other people have harder times to break into that bracket, and then that system would become self-perpetuating. I think would be my worry.
So there is a fear to that, but there's also the fear of the opposite, right? We passed the 19th Amendment and women were given the right to vote. You now have this massive voting block that could be pandered to that didn't need to be addressed on any level except for what you could give them, because they weren't active members of society at that point. They weren't really working. They weren't really involved in universities. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily a good thing, but what I'm saying is it created a huge class of voters that introduced radical change to a country that in a lot of ways wasn't ready for a lot of the change that was introduced. And a lot of the welfare state policies that you've seen carried over from that time are self-perpetuating and are never going to go away.
Sure, but I think that pandering to voters is good. Like, the more you have to pander to, the better. The more you have to take into account when you're enacting policy. This is a little Rawlsian, I guess, but if we're talking about crafting successful legislation for the United States, you should probably take into account as many people as possible when we do it. If it was just one group of people, anybody can be pandered to, whether that's working class men or whether that's people making a certain amount of money or people with a college degree or people of a certain age. The more people you have to pander to, arguably, the better the legislation should look, I would imagine.
Yes and no. I mean, this is also probably just a personal difference, is that I see a lot of groups as families, right? That when you have a mother, father, and a kid, let's just say a nuclear family of 3 or 4, let's say 2 kids, right? Turning them against each other is not in anybody's interest. And when you have people pandering to one side of a family and people pandering to another side, you tend to disrupt communities. Now, again, that's not an argument against universal suffrage. The main argument is, though, that people that have never been involved in the direction of society can be mass introduced to getting involved in that level of society and can tear it down to its core. Now, sometimes that's a really good thing. Sometimes it's a really bad thing. Like when you look at the end of the Civil War, right? And I'm not making a pro-slavery argument. I'm not making a pro-disenfranchised black argument. But in granting universal suffrage, you took people who couldn't read and people who couldn't in any way, shape, or form, understand the inner workings of society, and basically made them a majority in a lot of places. And by doing so, you disrupted a society that was already torn apart by civil war. And it took many, many years and many Jim Crow laws. It took lynchings. It took all of these things to overcome it. Whereas you could have gradually introduced suffrage, or you could have made some sort of requirement of suffrage, like I said, like a net taxpayer system. Like, black people were working after that. They would have been considered net taxpayers. They weren't taking anything from the government. But
I mean, I think that, I understand this. I think the argument is that it was always fucked. We just didn't see it. Imagine you've got a picture of a house on a block, and there's one house that's beautiful and 9 houses that are totally fucked. And you take a picture of this house, every week to see how that particular block is doing, and maybe people come by to clean up the house a little bit to keep it nice. And then imagine one day somebody's like, okay, hey, instead of taking a picture of just this one house, we should take a picture of the entire block. And then you do that. Everybody in the house that was nice is going to be like, dude, what the fuck? This place looks horrible now. But the other 9 people, they're like, dude, it always looked this way. You just didn't realize it. So when we talk about, giving the right to vote to a bunch of people that couldn't read, and now it's all fucked up because they've got, the right to vote. Well, it was always fucked up for them. They couldn't even fucking read. Like maybe the fact that it was just one group of people that was in charge of the country for so long, that was a problem, but we just never knew about it because they were the only ones who had voices that mattered, So I mean, like, I think it's easy to say that, like, well, this thing is, or it kind of reminds me, I hate to draw on this because I know that people might disagree empirically about what happened, but it's kind of like the Me Too movement where, a lot of women are like, man, this is, or a lot of men are like, holy shit, like, Jesus, like, damn, like, now that we've got Me Too, people are getting fucking raped and sexually assaulted everywhere, and a lot of women are just like, dog, this is like how it's always been. It's just now you're finally fucking noticing it, and people will go back and look at TV shows where guys are just fucking grabbing women's asses on TV, and even people that we would consider nice are just grabbing women's asses, and like it's just an LOL moment, and people just expect it, and the women are like, hey, like, this has just always been a reality. I feel like when it comes to voting, if you want, now I'm not going to fucking stand democracy because I got a lot of problems with democracy. I'm not going to be so edgy as to suggest something different. But like, I think that if you want to be critical of democracy as a whole, that's okay. But democracy for just a few probably isn't very democratic at all. And anytime you just have like subsets of people and you say they're the only ones that democratically matter, I think that there are so many external problems that open up as a result of that are going to occur. Like, it's either democracy for everybody or democracy for nobody. I don't think you can just have it for a certain subset of people and call that like a democratic system.
You see, my problem is that if you give me the option of democracy for everybody or democracy from nobody, I would probably lean towards democracy for nobody, because democracy, I mean, that was our founders' like biggest fear. They said democracy is just a tool of the tyranny. I mean, Thomas Jefferson said it's two wolves arguing with a sheep over what's for lunch. Like or voting over what's for lunch. Democracy itself, like, people can't be expected to understand the inner workings of government on every single issue.
Yeah.
That's why we have representative democracy. That's why we had a constitutional republic. And as of right now, the cost for entry to democracy is done so at the cost of the people who are providing the resources that are being distributed. I mean, as I said, being a net taxpayer doesn't mean you're rich. Being a net taxpayer means you just put in more than you take.
Sure.
A great many people would be, net taxpayers. So, but the idea that someone who's never left their parents' house and still lives there and is 19 years old and has never paid a dime in taxes, but is being pandered to for a vote for welfare, I think that the argument can be made that there's nothing to be gained from
I'm
it.
a YouTube boy.
I mean, I
this
think
is
that
so your editor can afford the hot.
I think that it really depends on wait, oh god, I'm sorry, my train of thought just got jittered for a second. When I think that there's like a misconception in terms of like looking at NEETs who are like voting for welfare. Like, I'm a net taxpayer, and I'm a net taxpayer, and I'm sure that there are people that are whatever the opposite of that, a net welfare recipient, I guess. I know that given the opportunity, most of those people would probably want to trade places with me in a heartbeat. They'd probably rather be the guy that's making a lot of money but paying a lot of taxes than the guy that gets, a fucking EBT card and maybe wasted on fast food sometimes, or gets a pair of shoes or something, if we want to say that welfare recipients are wasteful. I think that as soon as you start looking at people as like, well, you make money, so your opinion should matter more. I mean, like, the people that make money oftentimes make money for particular reasons that are beyond just the merit of that individual. And sometimes the people that don't make money aren't making money for reasons that go beyond their individual effort as well. I think it's so important that when we're taking into account like how to construct society, that we should probably be trying to construct the best society for everybody. And it seems like the easiest way to do that is like one person, one vote, rather than proportionally assigning it based on, how wealthy the family you were born into is.
I mean, as I said, I'm not advocating for any one specific system. I'm just saying that taxpayer is just one example. But I just also think that the examples that you did give, like spoiled rich kids, right? They're going to exist into a world of privilege, regardless of any type of societal deal you make with them.
Sure.
And it's always been that way, and it always will be that way.
Sure.
On the other side, people that are ridiculously poor, even through no fault of their own, are probably going to have less say in what happens than other people, and that's also just going to happen. But when you get to a point where you can take the resources of one and give to the other, and that person can vote for more of those resources, then you have a recipe for resentment that leads to civil wars. And that's where my main issue is with universal suffrage.
I mean, but like that clearly isn't the case. That can't be the case, right? Because the wealth divide in the United States is greater than it ever had. This is where I fight against, you can fight against so many ideologies on this. The wealth divide is greater than it ever has been in the history of the United States. And we don't see all of these poor people stealing the wealth from the wealthy. That's just not happening.
But the rate of poverty isn't greater than it's ever been. The poorest in our country are not that poor. Just because the distance between them and the uber rich is greater than it's ever been, doesn't mean that they're poorer than they've ever been. There were times where poverty in this country was gut wrenching.
I mean, it depends on what you're talking about, though. It's very weird because I have to reconcile the America that my mom tells me about growing up with the America that we actually truly live in, that we're the greatest country on earth and we have so much wealth, blah, 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 blah. If my girlfriend is visiting, she lives in Sweden and she comes here and I tell her like, oh yeah, like we should get like an STD test. That's going to cost $300 fucking dollars, by the way. Or I have to explain why when we drive around parts of LA and she's like, what the fuck? Like, do people go camping out here? And it's like, no, that's a permanent settlement of homeless people. They live here. By the way, there's thousands of these in LA. Like, that's unbelievable. Like, that level of wealth disparity shouldn't exist in a country where the poor people have the power to vote and steal wealthy from the rich. Obviously, that's not what's happening. Otherwise, we wouldn't see communities like that exist. Now, I'm not saying that like poor people in the United States are just as bad as like fucking people getting raped and murdered in Chad or Sudan or Uganda or some shit. I'm not making those claims, but very clearly there is like a huge issue regarding certain institutions in the United States, like homelessness or like the access to healthcare, that are not being addressed despite the fact that we have a democratic system. So it would seem to me that the fears that lower class people are going to take all the money from the rich just to fund their own shit are relatively unfounded.
No, but what I am saying is that the government becoming the decider of where the resources go tends to be the least efficient. If you had a net taxpayer system in LA, yes, the rich would be in charge, but they would also have a vested interest in not living in a tent city shithole. And they would tend to be able to better direct the resources that would fix that problem than depending on either Washington or even Sacramento.
But that's just, I don't think that's how capitalism works. So in capitalism, the most basic way to analyze capitalism is capitalism lets capital, money, flow to profitable ventures. That's what it does. That's really all our market does at the end of the day is capital can go from point A to point B. If there's money to be made, we have markets to fucking do it. Hell yeah. But if there's not money in helping, fucking Bob, the schizophrenic psycho that tries to stab women that walks by him, who's homeless, down in Skid Row, there's not money in helping get that guy off the streets. There's not money in helping, some guy that has no job and, just sits at home, shooting a heroin. There's not money to be made in helping that person or money to be made in helping somebody, get out of the prison system if they come out and they, recidivize. I don't know if that's the word, commit another crime and go back over and over again. Like for a lot of these problems, there's just not money to be made there. There's not a market system to do it. The government has to solve those problems because nobody's going to step up to do it because there's not money to be made doing it, right?
But the thing is, they always did. When the government, like the soup kitchens were always run by private donations. The hospitals were always run by private donations. Everything was always done that way. And when the government stepped in and started funding them, they started to get markedly worse because the people that were funding these things stopped funding them, and government resources become finite because you have to divide them up between different people, and people whine about taxes and all of that. And the Red Cross is a great example. They don't take government money. They made a very specific decision to not let governments influence their basically their operations. And in doing so, they've maintained billions and billions in resources through private donations. But when you look at like Doctors Without Borders, they've been compromised in many different countries where they've been involved in some horrible shit because their funding doesn't come from individuals who could pull the funding. Their funding comes from governments who can be subjected to propaganda.
I mean, like I guess I just don't understand the assumption, like, or the problem. Like, just because something's government funded doesn't mean you can't make donations still. No, like if you donate, like say I donate 20,000.
But people tend not to. That's the problem.
Well, then tax them more.
I can't answer the why.
I mean, like if you're not going to donate, then tax them. Then take it with the government money. The government gunman shows up and says you got to pay your taxes. We're going to kill you. I guess. I mean, I don't understand why somebody I don't think that. I don't think you'd think this. Do you think that if all government subsidies were to go away, that communities would just start taking care of themselves, that all the money would just naturally flow to where it is most needed, and soup kitchens and homeless volunteers and everybody would just spring up? Because if so, I just
it
don't.
always did.
But it didn't. I don't think there's never been no poverty or no homelessness in America. Like, we've always had problems related to this. It's just it felt like while other systems in the West modernized, America for different reasons like hasn't. So like for instance around, oh God, I think was it World War II, or was it around when we started tying like health insurance to jobs?
That was World War II. It was the Great Depression, but World War II made it worse.
Yeah, I mean, there were some unique things that got us into the position that we're in today. But I mean, I don't know. Like, I have a hard time believing that there are all these compassionate people that are just waiting for the government to get out of the way before they can start donating money. There are already so many causes you can donate money to in the United States. It's
not that they're waiting for the government to get out of the way. They donate to causes where the government isn't involved. That's where the donations tend to go, and those causes tend to be less and less geared towards the poor. They tend to be more geared towards, let's say artistic ventures. They tend to be geared towards more towards colleges. They tend to be geared towards more ventures where the government is not subsidizing the vast bulk of what's going on. Also, a lot of the organizations that take government money start becoming lobbyists. You know, like Planned Parenthood was completely private, and I despise Planned Parenthood, but it's just an example. They were completely privately funded for a very long time, and then once they started taking government money, they started lobbying for more of it. And now you have billions of dollars that Planned Parenthood spends every century on lobbying. You know, that could be going towards.
I would be shocked if that number was even in the hundreds of millions.
Oh no, you could easily look it up.
No way that it's billions. So this is just bullshit numbers real quick. So two of the most pro-choice active groups, or the active pro-choice groups, Planned Parenthood and the NARAL Pro-Choice America, spent a total between the two of them of $1.2 million in 2009 to 2010. Yeah, I don't know. I guess it just... it seems sad to me, the idea that, or even a bit unbelievable, that people would be ready to donate to the homeless if there just wasn't the government people helping the homeless. That seems. It's not that, as I said, it's not that they're waiting for the government to get out of the way. It's once government takes responsibility for it, private donations tend to go elsewhere, because the hold on, it's total contribution by party and recipient. Every year they spend about $40 million on what?
On political donations. Planned Parenthood's Action Committee.
Oh, a PAC? I think
No, it's Planned Parenthood's actual it's called the Planned Parenthood Victory Committee or Action Fund. It's part of Planned Parenthood. It's not a PAC that's associated with Planned Parenthood.
Gotcha.
The only thing they're not allowed to use towards political lobbying is actual money from the government. Like, they can't take a government subsidy for healthcare and then apply it towards political lobbying, but they can raise as much as they want to donate towards lobbying.
Sure. Okay.
And again, I wasn't trying to be bombastic with the number. Whatever the number is the idea that the government funding a charity will inevitably lead towards that charity becoming about lobbying for more funding from the government. And inevitably that they'll start getting involved in politics as opposed to getting involved with what they should be, which is helping their established constituencies.
Well, so one, you want them to be involved in lobbying if that increases their funding, because the goal is to get more funding if they feel like they need it, right? And then two, you want them to be involved politically if there are political changes that need to be done in order to fix some of these problems. So, for instance, if you made an organization that spent... Shit. Okay. I don't have all these numbers offhand, but so I'm being linked from like open.
I'll just allow you to generalize.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. I'm sorry. So yeah, from Open Secrets, like I'm getting that the Planned Parenthood Action Fund spent a total in 2020. So that's maybe this year so far. Maybe that could go up of $405,000. I don't know where the 40 million every year number comes from. Maybe that's something different, or that's their total budget or something. I'm not sure. But I'm sorry. So back to what I'm saying. Like, if an organization can spend a little bit of money lobbying and increase its funding, I mean, that's a good expenditure of their money. You'd want them to do that, right? If they spend $100,000 and in turn get $2 million in funding from the government, well, that's a really good spending of $100,000 if it's helping them with their problem. Is the first thing. And the second thing, you would want them politicizing certain issues if political change needed to happen for them to fix their issues. So, for instance, let's say that I was like a charity and I started lobbying to get more money, and one of the issues that I had was with prisoners getting assigned to or getting sentenced to prison too easily, right? Well, at some point, maybe I notice, hey, there's a private prison in the state, and I've noticed that like the governor, takes a lot of donations from the private prison, and they're like really stringent on like 3-strike rules because it keeps the prison full. Well, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put like some money towards supporting a politician that is against private prisons because this is fucking over my problem, right? I notice that a lot of the times we use the word political to mean an issue that I don't want to talk about, but like almost everything is, I'm not saying you're doing that, but like almost everything is like political in nature. Any charity that you're going to be involved in, whether it's malaria, that's political. Look at the stuff going on with the WHO right now. Homelessness, that's political. Look at things like Prop 13 in California or federal taxes on properties. Like healthcare, obviously, like every issue is political to some extent. So I would expect these organizations to get political, given the monetary support, because they should, right?
I can agree with that, as I said, to an extent, but I think that local communities and local resources tend to be better spent on local problems. Like I said, a Hollywood is more likely to clean up the homeless problem than the government of LA. So, like, that my opinion. I could be easily proven wrong if the numbers don't jive with me. I've seen from the minimal amount of research that I've done that privately funded organizations tend to be a lot more efficient than government funded organizations. So I just don't see a value to government funding for charities where local people can do it. And it goes back to just my original point of that income distribution doesn't necessarily signify, something bad happening. That just because there's a big gap in income doesn't necessarily signify that we have a huge problem. It signifies that people are getting more wealthy and that the gap between the rich and the poor is getting bigger. But if the poor are also gaining and coming out of poverty, then I don't really care how rich the rich people are.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that if we didn't have like problems with like access to healthcare or like massive homeless problems in the United States. But so, I mean, it seems like on those ends, we're not doing as well, but yeah.
I mean, before I let you go, again, this is anecdotal, but
yeah,
when I did live overseas, right, I lived under the socialized model, and I tell anybody and I'm a big fan of private markets for health insurance. It's great when you get sick. If you get bronchitis, if you get pneumonia, if you get sick, it is fantastic. You call up the doctor, you go. They give you no money changes hands. There's no idea that, you have to have an up-to-date card. It's just you go see the doctor. He gives you a prescription. You don't pay for it. You go home and you feel better. Then I had one daughter who couldn't walk. And I had a son who got RSV, which is like a really bad respiratory infection. And seeing a specialist took 3 months for each of them. My son was in the hospital for 2 weeks. And like we had to stay there 24 hours a day because there wasn't the ability to take care of them in the hospitals. Like we had to assist the nurses, and doing stuff like that. When you see the problems for the people who get really sick, it makes me believe there's the option out there to have a hybrid model where maybe, the government takes care of funding like primary care, but, we have private insurance for catastrophic, or the opposite, like we fund our own primary care and, the government takes care of catastrophic through taxes or something like that. I think there is the ability to have a hybrid model, but access to healthcare. I mean, both sides have its positives and negatives, and I think people who tend to say, well, our healthcare system sucks because, they're making the presupposition that it's better elsewhere because, and just because, like as I said, in Israel, it's great when you get sick. There are also a lot of problems. Also, your tax rate is 48% there for the poorest in the country. So just food for thought. I'm not making any like dramatic argument there.
Sure.
But Destiny, man, I really do appreciate this. I really had a good time. I mean, I think people were expecting us to like yell at each other through the whole thing, but I thought I made it pretty clear that we weren't going to get into any. I don't know if I disagree with you on much. So like, yeah. I'm sure there's plenty we disagree with, but I wasn't going to research everything you've said so I could yell at you.
Sure.
But I mean, coming on Tree's show on Sunday, that was awesome too, man. I'm glad people like you are out there because I like hearing different points of view.
Well, thanks a lot. I try my best.
No problem, man. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for coming. Thank you, everybody. I'm gonna read some super chats. I'll let you go though. Okay. I'm just gonna read these and be done with it.
All right, cool.
Okay. Have a great night, man.
Yep. Bye. Message in my Discord. Please drag me into this shit show. I'll do it. I need it. I need to argue with people.